Bob Herbert's OpEd.tv is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation with the support of Ann Ulnick.
Hi, I'm Bob Herbert. Welcome to OpEd.tv. When I was growing up, sports leagues wanted nothing to do with gambling. Baseball had been traumatized when the gambler Arnold Rothstein rigged the 1919 World Series. And college basketball in New York was brought to its knees by the humiliating point shaving scandal in the early 1950s. Technology has changed all that. Big Time Sports has fully embraced the world of online gambling, and sports betting is now as close to you as the cell phone in your pocket. Ads for websites like DraftKings and FanDuel are seemingly everywhere. What does this inundation of gambling opportunities mean for the problem gambler? Are there ways to protect those who are vulnerable to this dangerous and sometimes heartbreaking addiction? I'll explore this with my guest, Ashley Owen, who is a team leader with the New York City Problem Gambling Resource Center. Ashley, welcome. Thanks so much for coming in. I appreciate it.
Good morning, Bob. Thanks for having me.
So it's not just sports gambling. I mean, you can bet on your phone on casino-like games like blackjack and slots, and then there are those scratch-off games, those cards that seem to come in an endless variety. How have potential problem gamblers reacted to this sort of cornucopia of gambling that's available now?
Yeah, well, what we've seen is that, and this is similar to what's seen in other addictions, is that the more access that people have to gambling opportunities, the greater the likelihood is that they're going to develop a problem. And like you said, with the rise in online gambling opportunities, you now have, I mean, you mentioned scratch offs, even the New York State Lottery, is available online now. You have that available online, casino games. And what's coming very soon is the mobile sports betting in New York. So
which they already have in New Jersey.
They do. And there are people in New York who have already been accessing that way. By, for example, I know that there was the New York Times article recently that talked about, going over the bridge to get a New Jersey IP to gamble. So, a portion of New Yorkers have been accessing it that way. But, what's going to happen when it becomes available in New York State and when these contracts with the sports betting vendors get finalized is that there will be one less barrier in the way to accessing a gambling opportunity. And that's no doubt going to result in more gambling and a higher percentage of people having problems due to the gambling behavior.
So I'm not sure everybody understands, how do these gambling apps on your phone work? Can you just give us a sort of a brief description of how they're used?
Yeah, so there are different vendors who offer these sports gambling apps. There is, I believe, DraftKings, FanDuel. Those are two of the big ones. We've heard of different ways that the financial transactions works. From my understanding, there is you can connect it to like a PayPal or Stripe and do like a pay per bet or link an account to it. I think depending on the option you choose and depending on the vendor. But however people are able to access it in terms of putting the money up front, it is no doubt an easier quicker
Right.
access, right, than the way it was set up before, which was basically to participate at a casino in a state where it was legal.
Yeah, you had to go to a
Find a
casino,
bookie,
which
right?
was a
Like, those are
problem.
easier.
Or
Yeah.
you had to take a
Yeah.
chance on doing it with somebody who was illegal. You had to have a bookie
Yeah.
or something.
Yeah.
So it's really strange. I mean, and the advertising is intense. I'm a big sports fan, long-suffering Jets fan. But now you have like these ads for DraftKings and FanDuel right during the course of the game, and the pregame shows and the postgame shows and that sort of thing. And they have these kind of irresistible gimmicks, like no risk bets and guaranteed winnings to start. So you place a bet, but you're guaranteed to win. So suddenly you have additional money in the pot. And of course, people are going to gamble with that. What are your thoughts on the way these apps are promoted?
Yeah, we actually had our statewide annual conference last week for our parent agency, the New York Council on Problem Gambling. And there were a couple of speakers who talked about this, who are experts in the field. And they said there's actually no thing as a no risk bet. Like, they were very disturbed that all betting, all gambling by definition, involves risk. So, and the risks of gambling are often not talked about, and for understandable reasons, like not portrayed, in the advertisement of it. So, our view, at the Problem Gambling Resource Center is, we see all of the advertising that goes on. And one of the reasons why we're here is because we want to make it as easy and as appealing as possible for people to find treatment for problem gambling. Like, we want to make it as easy for people to find us and hear like the stories of hope, that we can promise through treatment. We want to make that opportunity of finding treatment as easy and as accessible and as appealing as the opportunity to find a place to gamble and have a good time, right? Because we're not able to change, the amount of advertising going out for gambling. That's something that's going to stay, that's going to be around. But what we can do is raise awareness about the other side of it, right? The other side of it, that this can be serious, but
there are alternatives, or you can access help. Some of the advertising is really insidious. I mean, I've seen on some sites, you can bet on things as absurd as who's going to win the coin toss at the beginning of the game, what color that Gatorade is going to be that's showered on the coach, maybe at the end of a game. And when I saw that, it sort of reminded me of the tactics of the old tobacco companies when they were trying to lure young people into smoking. So you guys are in the business of helping people who are struggling with gambling. Are there a lot of young people, and are these young people lured by these ads that seem targeted towards young people?
Oh, I imagine so. I don't know if we have any concrete data on the numbers around that, but we do know anecdotally, a lot of the work we do at the Problem Gambling Resource Centers, and one of my roles as a team leader is to have interviews with people who are in the community, some of which are in positions where they work for like nonprofits or colleges or schools when they come in contact with young people. And from what we're hearing from the community members is that there is a big appeal that young people, that really all people, but especially the younger generations feel towards these online apps. We hear that there is like a fear of missing out, right? Like they hear about these opportunities for their peers, especially if those peers are discussing like positive opportunity with gambling or wins. there is a sense of feeling like, well, if I don't bet now, am I missing out on something that could be, a good investment opportunity? And that's kind of scary, that gambling is seen as a potential investment. But we do hear just anecdotal stories of a lot of that. Yeah.
Now, most people who gamble do not become problem gamblers, which is a good thing, obviously.
Yeah.
But what constitutes a problem gambler? When you guys are assessing this, how do you determine that someone is a problem gambler? What defines that person?
I think it's important to acknowledge that problem gambling occurs on a spectrum, right? It's not just a concrete line that's drawn. And generally, the things that our clinicians will ask about, and our program managers will ask about when talking to people about their gambling are things like, the amount of time and money that is spent on gambling, right, the degree which either gambling behaviors or gambling losses are interfering with other parts of people's lives. Are people missing work due to a crazy night out gambling? Are people stealing from their loved ones or from their employer even to support gambling opportunities? Do people feel, usually when people have problems gambling, they're either very secretive about the behavior because they feel some kind of shame about it, or they are very kind of grandiose and over exaggerating the good parts, the parts to them that feel good about the gambling. They may be talking about gambling wins a lot, and kind of not being able to talk about it. So usually the disclosure is on either one or the other end of the spectrum. So those are a lot of the things that are asked about. Two really significant key indicators that somebody could have a serious gambling problem are, one, if they feel like they need to bet more and more money to get the same excitement out of the activity, that's a really important indicator to look for. Another important indicator.
Excuse me, but that's similar to what happens in other addictions. You don't get the same high, or you don't get the same thrill as you got in the beginning, and you have to build it up higher and higher and higher.
Exactly. And with gambling addiction, it's interesting because you're not putting a foreign substance in the body, but what brain imaging has shown during studies of people who have problems gambling is that we all have a neurotransmitter in our brains, dopamine, that elicits feelings of pleasure. And what brain studies have found is that the dopamine receptors in people who are vulnerable to problem gambling or who've already developed a problem, they experience kind of additional dopamine activity that's akin to what somebody who's addicted to alcohol or drugs might feel when they take that substance in. So even though gambling doesn't involve a foreign substance, it does involve a change in the brain that is felt, right? So essentially, somebody with gambling addiction, their definition of tolerance, right, is what we call it with alcohol and drugs, is needing to bet more and more money to experience that same dopamine rush. So it's really fascinating and really intense the way it impacts the brain. And along those lines, the second key indicator to look at is, does the person feel like irritable or anxious when they stop gambling, right? Because think about it, if you're gambling that regularly on that long of a basis, your brain is used to the dopamine rushes and drops that you experience gambling and in between gambling. And once you feel the drop, you're gonna feel a little anxious. Oh, I want that dopamine rush again. Where is it? So, and that usually manifests as anxiousness and irritability in people who are stopping gambling if they've done it, heavy enough for a long enough period of time.
Now, your group is, and we see your logo, but your group is the Problem Gambling Resource Center. What do you guys do, and how do people access your services?
That's a great question. Thank you. So there are 7 problem gambling resource centers across New York State regionally. And in New York City, we have kind of micro PGRCs in each borough. And each of the problem gambling resource centers are responsible for fulfilling the 2 parts of the mission of our statewide agency. One is to increase public awareness about problem gambling, which is exactly what I'm doing right now. That's kind of the public facing role of the Problem Gambling Resource Center, to really get out there in communities and in the media and just educate people about, hey, this is something that is potentially serious, has implications for people. And here is how to spot problem gambling when it happens. And the other part of our mission is to increase access to treatment and support for people who are struggling. And for that part of the PGRC, what we've done is we have received some funding, from the state to essentially recruit, train, and then reimburse clinicians who have an existing private practice in becoming specialists in treating problem gambling. Right. And then once these therapists complete the free problem gambling specialist training that our agency offers, we are then able to refer clients to them who call our resource center looking for help. And this increases access to treatment by a few ways. One, the private sector, the private therapy sector has never really been engaged by the state before like this, because what we were finding at the public treatment centers for problem gambling is that even though there were individuals within those centers who had the specialty to treat it, somebody would be going to a facility for treatment for gambling, but everybody else would be there for drug and alcohol addiction, and right. It didn't always feel like the right fit. So we just wanted to expand the options. Right, make more options available for gambling specific help. So we brought in we're bringing in therapists from private practice, and part of what our funding does is, in addition to reimbursing the therapists, we do try to make an insurance match when we can, but we recognize that not everybody impacted by a gambling problem has extra cash laying around, right? So we can, if there's not an insurance match, we do everything possible to assist with the finances of treatment and essentially step in and pay the therapists as our agency. So the person looking for help or their family member doesn't have to take on that burden.
Right. That's a really interesting point. I mean, if you've got a gambling problem, you're likely to be in debt, strapped for funds, so you don't have money to pay for treatment.
Exactly.
To get out of your problem. That's a potential catch-22.
Exactly.
Now, we're not going to be able to put the gambling genie back in the bottle, and I don't even know if you should. There aren't many people who would like to go back to the bad old days where gambling was illegal and it was a cash cow for the mob. So I think legalized gambling is here to stay. That being the case, what would you like to see happen in terms of ways to prevent people or to diminish the problem of problem gambling, of gambling addiction, and to provide more help, even more help than is available now for people who get caught in the throes of this addiction?
As you alluded to, we do have a neutral stance, on the legalization of gambling. We recognize that gambling is something that most people can do without it causing a problem in their lives. But in terms of problem gambling, and what should be done, we really encourage, anybody out there watching this to definitely share information about the risks. And it's important to realize that people with a gambling problem or people impacted by a loved one's gambling problem they could be anywhere. I mean, like, this is something that really impacts all populations, all walks of life, all demographics, all socioeconomic classes, right? Gambling is something that's widely available to anybody. So, I would just recommend anybody who is connected to any kind of group, any kind of community group, any kind of institution, any kind of workplace, to just make sure you have information available about the risks of gambling, especially if you're somebody who people in the community trust you, right? If you're somebody, we hear this about a lot of faith leaders, even barber shops, like, people, people trust like their barber, people
Without
trust
a
their
doubt.
yeah. So, and I think if you're one of those people who, people tend to come to me with problems, people tend to trust me, even if you're just a regular kind of average member of the community who, you tend to be something that people count on, familiarize yourselves, with the risk of problem gambling. We do have, I'm going to lean back a little bit so people can see our website, but that's an interactive website where people can go to, and we list on our website. It's an interactive site. You can go to the region where you're looking to get information from, and all of the regions have information about the warning signs of problem gambling. Definitely follow us on Facebook. We're on Facebook at NYC PGRC. We're on Instagram at New York City PGRC, and we really do try to use social media as an opportunity to do a lot of posts about the warning signs of problem gambling. So definitely, connect with us on the internet to get that information. Definitely, I would say familiarize yourself with your local problem gambling resource center number and who the points of contact are. We do go out and do presentations to all sorts of agencies, organizations, and the general community. Whoever wants information from us, we're easy to assist. We don't cost anything, because we're a nonprofit. So I would say those are all things that anybody in the community can do. We are also doing a promotion, a campaign this month and next month. It's called Stronger Than You Think and Why. And if you go to StrongerThanYouThinkAndWhy.org, we have more information about how you can support us getting the word out about this.
Now, we've only got a couple minutes left, but we mentioned earlier the governments are involved in this. You brought up the lotteries, but gambling has been a colossal sort of source of revenue for state and local governments. And, we've got lotteries, we've got numbers games, we've got the scratch-off tickets that we mentioned. Governments get into these contracts with the gambling apps the sports gambling apps that we've been talking about. So it would seem to me that if government's going to be so heavily involved in gambling, that they have also a responsibility to try and fight or fend off problem gambling, which of course, as you've been talking about, costs quite a bit of money. Right. How's the government been doing in this regard? Are they stepping up to the plate, or are they really sort of not meeting their obligations to the degree that they should?
Well, that's one of the reasons that the problem gambling resource centers expanded to begin with, is because there was a recognition on a government level that problem gambling does cause harm, and part of what it does cause is fiscal harm. So the creation, we're very new. The problem gambling resource centers expanded. We had a pilot program in Queens, actually, from about 2014 or 2015 to 2018. Then that was successful and built on the same model that all of the PGRCs are now. And then in 2018 and 2019, that's when the infrastructure expanded to statewide. So in many ways, the creation and expansion of the problem gambling resource centers was part of the government's response to this.
Right.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about beyond that, because it would seem to me that you're going to actually have to have the treatment centers that you've been talking about. You mentioned the kind of advertising that's required to compete with the advertising of the sports gambling apps, it would seem to me that your organization would not be able to do anything on that scale. I mean, I guess we've run out of time, but it seems to me like for both government and private industry, there's quite a bit more to be done. I wish we did have more time to talk about this. We've been speaking with Ashley Owen of the Problem Gambling Resource Center of New York City. Ashley, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Bob. Take care.
And to our viewers, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.